everybody, and welcome to another ECIST Bitesize podcast. My name is Erica McGuinness. I'm an improvement manager and I work for ECIST. And I'm joined today by Zoe and Joe, who are colleagues from Barnsley Hospital, who are here to talk to us about their long length of stay process. And the Trust has invested a considerable amount of effort and energy into making this process sustainable. So I'm sure that the next 10 or 15 minutes of conversation will have some really good tips to share. Before we start our discussion, it'd be nice to let our colleagues introduce themselves. So Zoe and Joe, would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm Zoe Pierce. I'm Discharge and Patient Flow Matron.
Hi, I'm Jo Bean. I work as a consultant in the Emergency Medicine Department and I'm Deputy Medical Director at the Trust.
Welcome and thanks very much for joining us. I guess my first question to both of you is, how did you both come to be involved in the long length of stay process in your organisation? Joe?
I think it was probably Zoe's idea first, so I'll let Zoe talk through how she came upon the idea.
Yeah, so we started about 3 years ago, and we'd actually completed some work with NHS England on the Safer Patient Flow bundle. And one of the things that I thought were really interesting out of that was actually the benefit that a long stay review would have on our patients in our bed base. Length of stay was something within my portfolio that I were given. And so we looked at setting it up. We set it up about 3 years ago now. And because I'd worked with Jo previously in ED and obviously a new role as Deputy Medical Director, I just sort of managed to get her involved.
Yeah, and I think for me, when Zoe mentioned the idea, clearly as an emergency medicine consultant, I see the front end of the hospital and the challenges that lack of bed availability brings to the emergency department. So yeah, just when we were thinking about how we could improve flow, it seemed an idea that we could try, see if it worked.
That sounds very logical and very sensible. So if we had to describe what that process looks like to colleagues who might be listening to this podcast, you've obviously said it's a 3-year journey, so I'm assuming it's been through a number of different iterations. So where did you start out with the process and what does it look like today?
So to start with, we had quite a vast team that went out and reviewed patients. So it's always been, we've always had a physical presence. So we've always gone out to the wards individually and we've always asked for updates from the ward staff. Pre-COVID, we had therapies involved, we had community teams involved. There were probably about 7 or 8 of us that used to go round, and then obviously during COVID we had to put some restrictions in. But I think at that point what we also found was actually we work quite different now with the criteria to reside and discharge to assess. So it worked quite well with just Jo and myself, and sometimes we do get an odd couple of other people that come. We have had exec team members come out with us, which I think is really good, and it sort of got staff to buy in. It's been a really difficult 3 years. The first year, we did struggle with engagement. It could take us, up to 4 hours to get round. It was quite slow. People weren't ready for us. People struggled with updates. And now we do between 145 and 160 patients each week, and we've got that down to 2 hours. Every ward's now ready for us. When we get there, they're all ready with their updates. And now we even get wards asking about patients that haven't triggered 7 days, which is really good. One of the first things we did was we looked to review all patients over 21 days because we thought that's where his issue lied. But we realised actually they'd already got to 21 days, so we couldn't really have an impact. So we did reduce that to 14 days, but then we realised actually 14 days still, we've still missed opportunities in patient journeys. So we quickly reduced that to 7 days in all areas and 5 days in any short stay areas. We've also reviewed all medical outliers too from day one. And I think we've seen a real benefit to that. And that's how we've had such an impact on our 21-day patients, because we've picked blockages up really early on in patients' journeys.
So starting as you mean to go on then clearly is obviously a very important feature. What does the process look like on the ward then? So who joins you from a ward point of view?
So to come into that, so who we have now is we have generally Zoe or one of her colleagues is sort of the discharge team. We have assistants who can do the sort of clerical aspect of it and follow up. And then myself, so that's our sort of core minimum of 3. Actually, we're now joined by the community matrons on a rotational basis, just to build in the links with our community partners. So a list gets sent out to the ward teams the day before of the patients that we'll be discussing, and essentially we want to know, are they medically ready for discharge, and so what support might they need on the onward journey. Do they meet the criteria to reside, in which case we're happy that they need to be in the hospital. Or the really key group, I think, is the ones that don't meet the criteria to reside. So that's often a decent chunk of our patients, and really they're the patients that we like to focus on to get them moved on to the point where they are medically ready for discharge, because generally I think they're the patients that should be ready in the next day or 2. So we follow that up. So a list is created, and at the 3:30 bed meeting that afternoon, we then ask for updates, particularly on those patients who don't meet the criteria to reside. And we're able to flag particular delays. So sometimes there's delays in imaging, sometimes there's delays with certain specialties. We've been able to work out particular patient pathways that cause blockages. I think that's been really helpful. And so, so we go through that list at the 3:30 bed meeting, and also use it as an opportunity to make sure that patients are getting that daily senior review, that there are board rounds happening on all the wards, and reinforcing things like golden patients for the next day.
Do you think that your physical presence has actually made a bigger impact in that respect? So how important is it that you physically take yourselves over to the ward environment?
Yeah, I think Zoe will come in for that. I think for me as Deputy Medical Director and a leader, it's a really good way to see what's going on the wards. You get a real feel for each ward. So people will come up with us with other problems as well, other things that they're having issues with. We can use it as an opportunity to highlight other things that are happening in the hospital at the time. So when we launched e-prescribing recently, we were able to take the e-prescribing team and they were able to highlight it and organise training for people. So it's a good point of contact for that. I think it just 2 things. I think the ward staff are really busy, and if you're asking them to join the team meeting, it's taking them away from clinical care and they wouldn't have the time. So being physically present, we can get to the ward to the person who is able to tell us what's happening with those patients. It just probably gives it a bit more credibility.
Is there any thoughts from you in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really vital. People now know us, they expect us to know us face. We've built up some really good relationships. We can also access notes. So if there's anything that we're concerned about, we can quickly look in a patient's notes to get further information. I think it reassures us about the patients within the bed base and around the wards, and you get a feeling as to how, stretched they are, how acutely ill some of the patients are. It definitely gives you that better feeling. And I think now people have got the confidence in us to know that we will support and help with blockages. So they do come to us now with other things. We have really good representation from lead nurses and discharge coordinators that give us the updates, but we also know that the medical teams are about. So if we do need to ask anything from the medics, we can do. And I think both sort of Joe and I are from an ED background, so it's sometimes okay to ask the questions around, well, if this patient was an ED, we'd maybe have discharged a little bit sooner. So what can we do to get this patient at home? And because we're not from that ward background, it comes over a little bit better for staff.
Less challenging, perhaps. And I guess that leads me into perhaps asking you a little bit about engagement. So I can absolutely see, Joe, how that leadership presence makes a vital difference. But you've also reflected quite honestly about the fact that engagement took a little bit of time, I guess, to catch on. So any reflections that you think we could share with other trusts, I guess, particularly from my point of view, in dealing with those more sceptical colleagues?
Yeah, I think it helps because, like say, because I'm an emergency medicine consultant, so I don't generally manage inpatient. So that gave me a little bit of an advantage. And yeah, there was some skepticism because I guess people feel like you're watching them almost, aren't you? That you're there to criticise what you're doing. So I think if you can be there in a supportive way, and if they can see some positive changes, so you know, if wards do highlight particular problems with certain pathways or certain processes, then what I tend to do is come up with a bit of an action plan for that, and then I'll feed it back to them the next week, what we've done as a result and what we're hoping to change. So that's been positive. I think we've just kept at it, really.
Yeah.
It's just, it's going to take a few weeks for people to understand what's happening, isn't it? But also I think that there's some really complex patients, aren't there? You know, and we frequently come across quite difficult safeguarding issues, but being able to provide advice and to those ward staff, and if necessarily to get some senior people involved with those really difficult patients, I think the wards appreciate that.
So there's something, I guess, about also allowing people to see the fruits of their invested time, isn't there? So the fact that you're almost doing a bit of a "you said we did" kind of approach in that respect. And as you say, I guess sticking with it is also very important, because that longevity then breeds, I guess, a certain amount of confidence. Zoe, from a nursing perspective, is there anything different or anything perhaps you would want to additionally point out from an engagement point of view?
I think it's just the perseverance. I think it's just keeping going every week and letting them see your face and know that you are there to support, and you're doing it in a supportive way. I think also from a nursing aspect, well, both medical and nursing, but people need to understand the reason why we're doing it behind it, and that's the patient stories. So they need to see the benefit to the patients. And you know, we work to a real home first approach. So I think when people see that and realise that we've managed to get patients out a couple of days earlier and we've actually got them to their own home, I think they appreciate it a little bit more. We share that data too. We've got a long stay dashboard that shows all patients over 7, 14 and 21 days within the trust, and it's broken down via ward, so the wards can see where they are with their performance. We've also got a ward accreditation dashboard that looks at some of the safer principles for wards, so wards can just see, you know, how they're doing and what sort of impact it's had on their area.
And that's "how am I doing?" I think question at individual level is so important, isn't it? Because people want to see, you know, what they've invested in, the outcome, I guess, that happens at the end of that process.
I think it's that. Sorry, I think it is that patient story, isn't it? And making it more patient-centered. So I think the language in the hospital has really changed away from things like back to baseline to medically ready. Or, you know, we say this patient's been away from home for 2 months, and that makes staff really think. And
it makes it more personal, doesn't it? It moves away from that performance conversation to a conversation that is driven by the patient and quality, which I guess is, you know, the reason why we're all here at the end of the day. How has your conversation with wards changed as a result of the kind of introduction of criteria to reside? Has it at all?
Yeah, I think it's very different the way we work now, and I think we see a difference in the patients that are in the bed base now. Historically, when we first started, we had a lot of patients in the bed base that were waiting external services, for instance, increased packages of care, care home beds, and that's changed now. I think it's taken quite a while for staff to understand the difference between medically safe for discharge and meeting a criteria to reside. We have a team that look at that daily, but I think that gives us a reassurance that the coding against those patients is right daily in the bed base, because we see it firsthand once a week. We look at those patients, so it gives us that reassurance to what patients are out there in our bed base. You know, there are some things that we still struggle with a little bit around investigations. If a patient's well and not scarring and not on IVs or fluids, about the confidence of being able to discharge that patient but know that they could have rapid access. And I think, you know, some of these pathways hopefully will be picked up in future by virtual ward and things. But people now are referring to the patient's criteria to reside. Great. It has taken a while, but they do now. When we go to the areas, they refer, yes, this patient meets the criteria to reside because of this, this and this. So it has made our life a little bit easier.
Yeah, and we did do things like give little pocket cards with the criteria to reside. So I think that just focuses staff's minds as to what they are.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess it's nice then to see both of those conversations come together into like a single discussion. One more question from me. If you had to share your top 3 tips with other organizations, so we've already talked about one quite extensively, I think, which is the sticking with it and the sustainability. But what other reflections would you share with organizations who might be in the midst of reviewing their long length of stay processes at the minute?
I think for me, it would be the executive team supporting, and actually they've been present on some of the long stays, and I think knowing that they've supported us to do it, and the staff knowing that the executive team have supported us has been really beneficial. That's probably one of mine.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's keeping it patient focused, but being supportive of the ward staff and supporting their processes.
Thank you very much, both of you. And on that note, we'll say thank you to both of you for your time, but also hope that any colleagues listening into this podcast have found the conversation as helpful as I have. Thank you very much.